Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I am here with.
Hi, I'm Brandan Conway. I'm one of the co-owners of Magpie Games, and I'm the lead designer for Avatar Legends the RPG.
Mm, I've been a fan of your work for some time. I am deeply impressed with the Root role-playing
Thank you.
game.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
I always felt that the board game's great, but the lore of the board game was I always found that the most enticing thing about the game. All the politics and maneuvering you have to do, and I was happy to see that translate so well to the role-playing game. But today we're going to talk about Avatar Legends, the role-playing game, the Republic City sourcebook. So probably a silly question. Anyone watching this would know what Republic City is by watching the series or reading the comic books. But for anyone that doesn't know, how would you describe Republic City?
Sure. So, Republic City is sort of the primary setting of the Legend of Korra series, which is the second series in the overall Avatar oeuvre. It's settled around Korra, the current Avatar, and it sort of shifts the timeline forward. So, if you're most familiar with Avatar: The Last Airbender, this one is, I think, approximately 70, 80 years later. Um, and so the actual setting is much closer to early 20th century in terms of styles and technology, and often the issues that they're confronting. Republic City is sort of this new-ish city that was built up in that intervening time period between those two eras, between the two shows. It is a very modern city. It is a place with lots of different kinds of people, and it kind of represents a lot of the changes that have come into the setting as a result of what Aang did in Avatar: The Last Airbender. And it's also the focal point of a whole bunch of new issues that they're trying to face and contend with throughout the course of The Legend of Korra. So the actual Republic city setting that we are focused on is the one that comes at the end of all the available Legend of Korra materials. So that is to say, at the beginning of Legend of Korra, the city's in sort of its own place. It's got skyscrapers, it's got satomobiles, which you should hear as like basic automobile car kind of things. Uh, but it goes through a lot of substantial changes over the course of the show and then the comics. I say that only by virtue of, as we talk about it, there are likely to be functionally spoilers.
So, is this book, this source book, a collection of adventures? Is it just a setting kit of sorts? What is this
Yeah,
book exactly?
Yeah, so at this point, we are thinking of our source books in two main categories. We have adventure guides, where we did Wan Shi Tong's adventure guide that included 5 adventures and some additional play materials. And it was sort of focused on the voice of Wan Shi Tong from his library. That's the great owl spirit with a library that has existed for eons. And then this book is a setting toolkit, where the idea is that it focuses on a specific setting and it provides lots of details about it, but it's also providing lots of tools that you can use in other games, and with the notion that you're going to make this setting your own. You're going to play to particular elements that you find interesting. The toolkit is here to give you a whole array of tools, not to expect you to somehow use every single thing in the box, because that can get a little unwieldy.
Hmm. And if I may ask, when it comes to the setting, the lore of Republic City, does this incorporate both the series and the comic books?
Yes, it does. This is set post the second major arc of the Legend of Korra comic books, at least as at the time of us publishing it. At some point in the future, there very well may be more stories, but for the moment, it incorporates the events of Turf Wars, which was the first series, and Ruins of Empire, which is the second series.
Hmm. And of course, let's talk about player options. People
Sure.
love new options when it comes to their player characters. What does this book have available?
So at its core level, these options can be used in all the different eras and settings that you would play Avatar Legends, the role-playing game. It has 3 new playbooks, which are the Adrift, the Aspirant, and the Outcast. Any of those can be used in any setting. They had some ideas that fit Republic City particularly well, but they can definitely be used in any given era of play. The Adrift is sort of, you're trying to figure out who you are. You've been on a particular track your whole life, and you've just been going through the motions, and now you're trying to actually exert control over yourself and maybe pick a real path for yourself. It's kind of based on my um the aspirant is you really want to do something big in the world, and to do that you kind of have to play with public opinion, and as a result you wind up spilling into the space of celebrity almost. It was originally inspired by Ty Lee, but we built a lot of additional ideas upon it to really take it somewhere new. And then the outcast is you belong to a community and you got chucked out. And that gives you a useful perspective. You're the outsider looking in and you can see things nobody else can see. But of course, you're on the outside. Do you want to come back inside? What community do you actually want? So we have those 3 new playbooks. We have a whole array of new techniques, which every character in Avatar Legends can take techniques, new things you can use inside of combat, and they can be taught to you by special teachers. And again, they're available in nearly any era of play. But the particular techniques in this book are emphasizing weapons and technology. There are techniques for all the different kinds of trainings: firebending, airbending, waterbending, earthbending, but there are 2 kinds of trainings, weapons and technology, that we give a special focus for in this book, because Republic City, being the most modern era, has lots of technology, has lots of new weapons, things that you can do, smoke grenades and so on and so forth. So we have lots of those techniques in the book. And then lastly, we have a bunch of new options that are a little bit more focused, if not on Republic City itself exactly, they're focused on that era. So you can use these options in games that are set all over the world, but they're probably best suited towards this latest era because a lot of them emphasize technology. So we have new rules for vehicles. So you can do car chases. We have new rules for pro bending. So you can do the advanced sort of professional sports league of fighting that featured in the first season of Legend of Korra. There's the primary biggest league is in Republic City, but there are leagues all over the world now, little leagues. So you can play with those rules, create a pro bender, and actually have the pro bending matches play out over the course of your game. And then there are mecha rules, because Legend of Korra introduces mecha suits, it introduces mecha tanks, it introduces the large scale powered machines that are designed originally to make a non-bender a match for a bender, and they've gone through many iterations of course of that story, so we have rules for how to use them in your game.
If I'm being asked, as a designer, was it tricky trying to incorporate a lot of like modern technology into this setting?
Yes and no, because the setting has always had this strange mix of things as a result of bending being present. You could always sort of get away with quote unquote more modern technologies by virtue of, well, somebody figured out how to do that with bending. In the original Avatar: The Last Airbender, we arrive in the city of Ba Sing Se, and there are functionally trains, but they're not trains. There's an earthbender who's moving the earth to push this entire cart along a big earthen track. So they got to have the technology of trains without actually having what we think of as the technology of trains, engines and tracks and whatnot. So that had always meant there was an intermix of these things. And now, because these things are core elements of the actual story told in the Legend of Korra, the way they change the world, the way they put power into the hands of non-benders to suddenly match benders, but the way the world becomes interconnected by airships, and the way that these new technologies create new dangers, that's a repeated theme throughout these stories. So that actually made it fairly easy to have an idea of how these things would come in. The core of adding them in for the rules was, well, vehicles, really, I just wanted to have a great way to do car chases and to incorporate them into the combat mechanics, basically, so that you can have this ever-flowing, moving, shifting combat on the vehicles, taking into account the guy who's driving and the vehicle status and the guy in the passenger seat who's throwing fireballs at everybody else. So that was just me essentially being super excited to have fun with all of these different ideas and really make them actually matter mechanically. But then the mecha was an honest assessment of, Well, these should be very dangerous. These should be very powerful because the whole point of them was to make a non-bender the match for bender, or at least originally. And while at this point in time we can include rules for customizing them, we can talk more to the notion that mecha are much more common, and as a result, there are civilian mecha, there are loader mecha. Think from aliens, right? There are these mecha that are still dangerous, but they're not built to be military weapons. That increases the variability of what we can do with them. But at their heart, making a machine that is just fairly potent was immediately where we started with, and we built that into the system so that they are fairly scary to go up against if you're going up against somebody who knows what they're doing and it's a well-built mecha. So all of it sort of tied into the existing fiction that had laid down a strong enough foundation that we could build on that mechanically.
Mm. Well, speaking of scary, what are the villains in this source book? What NPCs are available in this source book?
Sure, yeah. So the answer to that question is not simple insofar as there are a lot. There are many, many antagonistic characters that you can use throughout the entire book. And obviously, we always play with this idea of characters who might be more or less villainous, who might have reasons for why they're doing what they're doing, but they might be out of balance. That's usually the term that we use to describe a lot of these characters, is that they're out of balance. They may have a good idea, but they took it too far. That's in some ways what defines Korra's villains as opposed to Aang's villains, where Aang's up against Ozai, who's just a mad murderer. But Korra is up against these characters who have these good ideas that at the end of the series, she has to actually grapple with in order to try to find a place in herself that says they were right about many, many things. They were just wrong about certain other things, and that's what took it too far. They were out of balance. So for us, we have breakdowns of the city's districts, 10 different districts in the city, all of which are filled with ideas and plot hooks and threats and things that you can play with, ranging from the people in charge of a factory district who are trying to take advantage of the people living there to incredibly wealthy, high-powered corporate CEOs who are trying to enact their own agendas, to crime lords in different parts of the city who are more than happy to seize greater control and start crime wars as they see fit, to anarchists, to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is a little bit of what I mean by it's a toolbox. We don't expect you to incorporate every single thing. If you try to incorporate all of that, all of those ideas, all of those different villains, it would almost certainly just become too much. We want you to say, we are playing in this district. This is our focus. This is where we're setting it. We're going to be so interested in this. Or we're playing in a bunch of districts, but really we're following our story against that one guy who's trying to build weapons using spirit vine energy, and we need to stop it. And that's the story that we're actually about. So the idea is that we provide a swath of different villains and antagonists, as well as obviously some of the rules we include, meaning you can equip them with mecha, and you can equip them with vehicles, and so on and so forth. But we want you to be able to develop those villains based on that initial sort of setup for your own game.
Hmm. Let's talk about the art direction. Is the art
Sure.
direction for Republic City similar to the previous books that have been released?
Yeah, definitely. So Marissa Kelly is our art director. She's done this work on so many of our books, and she is incredible at the job. And she did it for the core Avatar Legends book, and she did it for Republic City. And so she manages the overall process of figuring out what art assets we can pull from what exists of Avatar art, to coming up with the new designs and new ideas, and working with Avatar Studios to bring those to fruition and make them come alive. So yeah, she's using a lot of similar ideas from the core book, including, for example, she sort of adopted the woodcut style that was used for Avatar Wands episodes in the Legend of Korra series. It was a completely different style than most of the rest of the series, and we all loved that style. And so she adopted it for the chapter art. So in Republic City, we still have these big 2-page chapter spreads that are in a slightly different, beautiful style. But beyond that, she's designing like the playbook images, so that you have these exciting, cool images that make you interested in picking up that playbook. And that includes, of course, designing what could a new Probender look like, and so on and so forth. So it was very similar process. I would largely defer most of those questions to her for like maybe a later interview and conversation, because I want to emphasize that like it's her work that is incredible and leading in that front.
Hmm. So, for this setting, for this source book, if you were to make characters, what characters would you make if I was running this game?
Yeah, so this one, they sent me this in advance, and I was like, what would I make? What would I do? Oh dear. All right, so this is where I get into my dark little heart. I My favorite superhero is Hawkeye. And that includes both Clint Barton and Kate Bishop. I love the guy who just has the bow on a team of demigods. So that means in Avatar, I gravitate towards the non-benders. I gravitate towards the people who use weapons and the people who use tech. So I'm like, I think a mecha pilot was one of my first thoughts. I would really want to play with the mecha rules. I would want to play the character who has like their junky mecha that they managed to put together from scraps left over from all the myriad conflicts. Like they managed to assemble these pieces illicitly, and now they have their little junk mecha that they're constantly improving, almost akin to the character from Pacific Rim. What's the sequel called?
Uh,
The I forget the name of the I forget
yeah.
the subtitle, but it's the second Pacific Rim movie where the character Amara put together her own cruddy, smaller Jaeger that gets to run around and do fun things throughout the movie. And that's the kind of thing I think would be really fun, at least because it creates these interesting challenges. You've got your mecha, and if you can bring that into your fight, that's a huge advantage, but it's a big old mecha. You can't bring that everywhere. You can't bring that into a club with you. So there are these constant push pulls that the character would be involved in of wanting to get their mecha and then being overpowered, but not always having access to it, and there being greater tension. And then, of course, for me, the tinkering piece of just mechanically getting to be like, ooh, but what is the new thing I could add to my mecha that would be really fun? To
Hmm.
do a lot of this, the second piece of it was I was realizing, even though I have this emphasis on putting them together as a junk mecha, I'm like, but maybe I'd want to play a successor from the core rulebook, because then I can be like the heir to a triad, and I can be disinterested in any of that criminal enterprise. I don't want anything to do with it. I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to do bad things. I just want to tinker on my mecha, Dad. And so I'm constantly at odds with the triad trying to pull me back in. And even, you can build in those expectations where we're a triad full of firebenders and you're not a firebender kid. You already are subpar. I'm like, ooh, I eat that stuff up. So
Hmm.
that's where I would be aimed at, is like a successor of a triad who's not a firebender, who's not a bender at all, who just wants to work on their mech, but constantly gets dragged back into the triad stuff.
Hmm. So, what is next after this? What concerning either your personal projects or even the Avatar Legends role playing game? Anything
For
you can
sure.
share?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of things that we're looking at, that we're noodling on. In general, we're finishing up the final version of Urban Shadow Second Edition, and we're doing a lot of work on Rapscallion, which is an upcoming pirate PBTA game. Think One Piece in sort of tone and style. And for Avatar, we are working on new projects. Like I said, we have these setting toolkits and we have these adventure guides. So we are working on a new adventure guide, and the thing I'm most excited about, to say with what we're trying to do for it right now, is we're playing a little bit more with a campaign of adventures, with multiple adventures that connect to each other, that also play with one of the fun things of Avatar in general, which is you have The Last Airbender, which was set 70 years ago. You have Korra, which is set 70 years after that. You have these many different eras that you can play with. We, in the core book, describe the Kyoshi era, the Roku era, the Hundred Year War era, Aang era, and Korra era, largely separating them by avatars. So we can play with a story that spans many generations. And that's the most interesting thing for me, is that we are really trying to play into that with an ongoing campaign that spreads across hundreds of years, to kind of sort of tell the story of a place that you will change and alter by virtue of your decisions across these adventures. And then beyond that, we're looking into another setting toolkit. And for other projects outside of that, we at Magpie are working on our own new system, with an emphasis on sort of long term play and long term character growth. That's the big thing that we want to focus on there. PBTA play, we love. You can play it in a campaign, and it works great in a campaign, but it also produces this sort of chaotic kind of play because things are constantly happening. You're constantly reacting to stuff, and it's a little harder to slow it down. You really have to actively say, and we stopped and we cut forward 2 years later or something in order to sort of not actually have the actual cycle play where, well, next week somebody else attacks the city. And then the week after that, turns out the city's run out of water. And the week after that, a giant spirit is attacking the city. And that's great for this adventuresome, exciting action play, but it's not so great for a sort of long-term stretched. We need the lulls, and we need the lulls to also be interesting in their own way. So that's where we're thinking about designing our new system for future games.
Wow, that's really exciting. Can't wait to find out more.
Yeah,
So before we wrap up, I have one more question. Um,
absolutely.
so there's been many animated series that have come and go since the beginning, but Avatar has been around for a while. They're coming out with a live action series on Netflix sometime soon, and there's of course talk of more stuff coming from that universe by the original creators. So why do you think that Avatar has such a long-lasting appeal in pop culture?
There are a bunch of things I could point at. It's a great world to play in. It's just fun to imagine. And the way bending works is always fun to envision. That's part of why we built it into the game we did, was so that you can just be creative and be like, oh, I do this crazy thing. I pull the water out of the cloud the way they did in that one episode. And it's fun to exist in that space. It's fun to have these hybrid animals everywhere and to have everybody be weirded out by the idea of just a bear that's not a hybrid animal. It's just a bear. It's just confusing. There's all manner of stuff in there that I think adds to it and helps keep it in everybody's minds. But I think the real core of it and the reason why it has persisted is because it focuses on these characters and their internal struggles and their internal progression and their internal decisions. Because at heart, The Last Airbender is about Aang and his crew, but Aang making these decisions, deciding who he's going to become, and really grappling with these big issues, with these big dilemmas. At the beginning of it, I would say, in terms of our game, he's an icon and he's trying to struggle between, does he want to be this thing, the avatar with all these responsibilities and duties and this gigantic mantle, or does he want to be free to be himself and make his own decisions and just be fun? He wants to be just a kid. And the fact that that arc carries through so well throughout his story in that first season. And then it can change so that by the last season, he's actually on a different arc. He's accepted responsibilities as the Avatar at some point in season 3. And instead, his arc is about, how do I actually do this while staying true to myself? How do I actually defeat Ozai, this nightmarish figure that must be defeated without betraying my own ideals? But then, of course, the easy answer for great characters is we turn to Zuko, this astonishing character arc for what is considered a kid's show, but it's this complex and rich back and forth of this character who is broken and abused and on this incredibly dark path. And he starts coming out of it. And if you've never, I'm sorry to spoil this for everybody if you haven't seen it, but it's so amazing to have this arc where you get to the end of the second season and we know how this arc goes. He's been on a redemptive journey. We hit the end of the second season. We're expecting him. This is it. He stands up against his terrible family. He defends the Avatar, and he does not. That doesn't happen. He falls back into darkness. He makes the wrong decision, sides with his family against the Avatar. And that's so human. And we hate watching it because we don't want to see him make that decision, but we relate to it and we feel it so deeply when he does that it just sticks with you forever. Yes, of course, eventually he does come around and redeem himself, but that sense of he's on a path that's not this perfect narrative arc where he just goes straight to becoming a good guy. He does dip into darkness before coming back. He does make mistakes. All of these characters are on journeys that don't follow a straight line. And even Avatar Korra is my favorite. And I love the fact that that fourth season of Avatar Korra story is all about her dealing with the trauma of everything she's gone through in the past 3 seasons, how it is so much and so overwhelming. And it's not just simply, nah, she just moves on to the next thing. No big deal. Not a problem. My life was almost taken from me, but it's not a thing. It actually dwells with the idea that this incredibly strong, powerful figure who's able to punch her problems into submission. She is the root of the Hammer playbook, of course, for anybody who's wondering. The Hammer playbook being all about punching your problems into submission. Um, as that's her starting point, to see her go through this phase where she's facing an enemy she can't punch. She's facing her own internal trauma and trying to work her way through it and truly move forward and grow. Those are the things that I think keep us really coming back. Like, yes, all of the beautiful art and the wonderful ideas and the fun action scenes and the greatness of bending absolutely helps. But the thing that keeps us coming back are these oh so human stories that follow arcs that feel so real to us, that really dip these characters into complicated territory and let them grow, change, and develop.
So I would put a link in the description below of where to find either a PDF and a printed copy of this book. Brandon, thank you for taking the time to talk to us about this. This is very exciting. I knew this book was going to be good, but hearing you talk about it, the details, it gets me. I just love anything that helps me flesh out the world to our players is always a great thing.
My pleasure. I'm so happy to be here and talk about it. Yeah, we were so pleased to be able to spend time in Republic City and really expand on this place that has so many stories possible within it, that you can tell stories from an underground little town to the heights of the towers and have them all crisscross and interact, and again hit that same humanity that makes them come alive.
Hmm. So viewers, thank you for watching. Stay safe out there. We'll see you next time.